Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, June the 26th, 4 p.m. I'd like to call to order the Board of Commissioners Budget Workshop meeting. City Clerk, would you call the roll?
Mayor Brooks,
Here.
Commissioner Taglerini, Commissioner Kerr,
Here.
Commissioner McGeehan.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Having no public comment, we will move on to discussion items, fiscal year 2025 Budget Workshop number 3.
I just want to make clear that you made that statement, no public comment, because there's no one in the public that is here.
That is correct.
Okay.
There is no one here for public comment.
Okay.
Very good. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commission. Again, Robin Gomez, the Madeira Beach City Manager. I'll turn it over to Andrew Laughlin, our Finance Director, City Treasurer, in a moment. Just wanted to open or preface, this is our third budget workshop or public workshop for the fiscal year 2025 budget. As I've shared with you previously, we're in, I would say, the middle of some considerable capital improvement projects here in our city, and our budgets the last couple of years and going forward are reflective of that in terms of the number of projects and certainly the total size of the budget when you look at the operating versus the capital budget, which makes up, or for the current year, about half of the total city's budget. And you'll see that similar going into the future between a combination of some new structures to include a public works building, a parking garage, to road projects, milling and resurfacing various streets, to new bathrooms at Archibald Park, just to beach growing repairs that are occurring today as we speak, and mainly this fiscal year, but will carry over into next fiscal year. So one other thing to consider, that our projects are multi-year, so you do see what appear to be look like repetitive, but it's just concluding one year, beginning the other, and attempting to correspondingly split the expenditures across 2, occasionally 3 fiscal years. Additionally, we've discussed about the investments that we continue. So we're investing in our infrastructure and our ongoing maintenance, obviously, to make sure we have a super vibrant and clean and beautiful and attractive city, but also investing in our personnel. And you'll see in the budget also proposed increases in salaries, personnel costs for all employees. And similarly, while we're not proposing any increases in benefits other than we did the current year as approved last year for the current year's budget, we did offer an option for employees, those that were previously not eligible, to join the Florida retirement system, which did come with a bit of an increase. But just to preface a few, we're looking at a minimal increase in personnel. We'll go through that detail, specifically one full-time equivalent in the deputy chief in the fire department. We'll go through some of those details. So we're not growing in the number of employees. On the economic side of it, obviously our economy continues to do well. We received, and all of you have received, a copy of the preliminary tax, the valuation increases for the current year, and I believe they showed a little over a 9% increase in total real and personal property increase from the prior, for the current year, that we will utilize for next year's fiscal 25 budget. So economically, again, we continue to do fairly well, and so our revenues correspondingly continue to increase, again, keeping in line with ensuring that we provide a balanced budget, which we are required to do under state statute. So we will kind of proceed, and I'll turn it over to, also at any time, if you have any questions, please, or any comments, please feel free to interrupt. Just about all the department heads and staff are here to answer any questions, but please feel free to ask, and I'll turn it over to Andrew.
Great, thanks a lot, Robin. So just looking at the agenda, we're going to start with an ad valorem analysis. So we did get some preliminary taxable values from the property appraiser's office. We'll go through what the estimated tax revenues we could receive based on the current millage rate as well as some alternative millage rates. We'll go through that. Then we'll tackle the budget by fund and department. We're actually a little overambitious on this one. I think in the, when we went through Budget Workshop 1, we were just going to maybe go through operating. We'd already done capital, but we went ahead and provided everything, personnel, operating, capital, and an estimate of revenues. So we do have a complete budget here for you, albeit an early one, so there's plenty of time from this workshop to the next that we can make any adjustments as you see fit. And there could be some adjustments that occur in the next month to 2 months as things may get uncovered that we didn't initially anticipate when we put the budget together, but they should be more minor things. So what we have here at least is a albeit preliminary, a complete budget for the entire city, which is great. Probably we're ahead of the game even from prior years, and that we've got this in front of you in June. As Rob mentioned, we'll go through some of the personnel details showing you positions, historical positions to current positions, that FTE count plus salaries, weight and benefits, some historical analysis all the way up to what we're budgeting for the next fiscal year. And then we'll get into the details of the both positions, and then on the capital side, all the listing of the capital projects. We've already provided this to you in last workshop. There's maybe only a couple minor changes from last workshop. We can go through those, and then we'll just wrap it up with any Q&A that you have. Shall we dig in? All right, let's dig in. So starting on the ad valorem analysis, just to give you first an overview of the tax roll calendar and the stages of budget preparation to adoption as it relates to the millage rate. So by June 1, the property appraiser was to deliver that estimate of taxable value. Looks like, I believe I received that on May 29. So in this worksheet, you see the ad valorem analysis. In the top table, middle column, it says 2024 taxable value estimate as of 5/29. So the property appraiser was to deliver that by June 1st, got it a couple days early, and that's where we're at, the $2,213,260,488. I actually did get another estimate, a revised estimate just today from the property appraiser representative. It was off, it was actually slightly lower, but a very negligible amount. So what you see here is pretty much where it's at today. But by July 1st, we will also get the formal certification of taxable value from the property appraiser. That's the DR 420. So that goes to all the taxing authorities. So we'll receive that then, which will calculate out what not only our current millage rate is, which we know, but then also what the rollback rate would be. And then by July 30th, so we'll have our next workshop, and that fourth Wednesday, which may be July 24th. And by that time, I'll want to finalize from you all the plan on the millage rate going forward. And I still want to talk about that today and have that dialogue so we can be well prepared for that July workshop, where I want everybody to be hopefully aligned on the direction we want to go in the millage rate, that I then need to report by July 30th what the proposed millage rate and then the date, time, and place of our first public hearing will be. So that's due on July 30th, and we'll have one more workshop to cover that, but I'd like to get through a lot of that, at least preliminarily, in our discussions today. And then by August 19, the property appraiser will mail the trim notices to all the property owners, and then in September is when we'll hold our two public hearings. So jumping right into our ad valorem analysis, you can see that millage rate at 2.75 mils, that's that fourth one down, that is our current millage rate. And so if we kept it the same from FY23 to FY23/24 to FY24/25, our projected ad valorem revenues will be $5,782,143, which will be an almost $500,000 increase from this current fiscal year that we're in, so $482,364 from what we budgeted. What we've budgeted is about $5,299,000. What we've collected thus far is about $5,220,000, so about $80,000 off. And we anticipate some collection activity from now to the end of the fiscal year. So we should at least hit budget on fiscal year 2024, and that'll be what that increase that we can expect if we keep the millage rate as is at 2.75 mils. And then if we want to reduce it to 2.6 or 2.5 or 2.25, you can see what those reductions would look like, either increases from prior year, or we start getting into a reduction in ad valorem revenue if we go down to 2.5 or lower. You can also see then in that middle table, if you had a $700,000 property, what that savings would look like if you were to, if commission was to reduce the millage rate to 2.5, then you'd have $175 savings on your annual tax bill. Or if you went all the way down to 2.25, it'd be about $350,000 savings. What did I say? Oh, not quite, yes, $350, excuse me, thank you.
So for every 0.25 in reduction, you're looking at a savings or reduction in your property tax of $15 a month,
Yeah, you could look
based
at
on a $700,000.
a $700,000 home, yep, you could look at it that way. And then in the next page, just on the end of this page, you can see just the increases over time, since property values have been historically increasing. We did do a millage rate change, as you can see, from FY 2019 to 2020, from 2.2 to 2.75. The impetus behind that was issuance of debt for these Area 357 stormwater projects, and the debt that was issued to cover that. And then the increase in millage was to capture that revenue to help make those debt service payments and transfer that from the general fund to the stormwater fund on an annual basis until debt's paid down. So that was the reason behind that increase, and then it's been the same 2.75 from 2020 through current. So then on the next page, just goes in a little more detail of that of what your tax bill would look like. So we have historical from FY 2022 to 2023, what that millage rate was, and then if the rate remains unchanged for FY 2023, 2024, and then show you, well, if we had, or excuse me, what it was in 22-23, and then this past year, 2023 to 2024, and you can see where there's some maybe small changes, some the same for each of your different taxing authorities within city limits. And then I proposed the hypothetical, well, if we were to change the millage rate down to 2.25, what your total millage rate would be, down from 16.1412 to 15.6412, and what impact does that have on the average property tax bill? So we just did that comparison so you can see magnitude if it was 2.75 and then we went down to 2.25.
But that's assuming that none of the other taxing authorities change their millage rate.
Correct. And obviously, we don't have that information, and we won't until at the public hearings in September. But assuming everything else stays the same, but we lowered our rate, what would that look like in your tax bill? That's the analysis that was performed, exactly.
Okay, but historically, with the taxable value increasing over the past years, some, if not all, of these other taxing authorities have reduced their millage rate, not necessarily annually, but it's been going down.
Yeah. So yeah, that's why I showed those two columns and what was prior year to current year and what the millage rate was, some that remained unchanged and some that did provide some decreases. It looks like none had any increases. Most stayed the same. So then I broke it out between non-homesteaded properties, homesteaded properties, and then gave you both. So I showed you assessed value, and then the exemptions, 50,000 versus 20,000, 25,000. So school taxable value versus municipal taxable value. there's a difference there in the amount of the exemptions, so that's why those are in two different columns. So I had to do a separate calculation based on the school taxable value versus municipal taxable value for the school state and schools local. And you can see non-homestead versus homestead, what those number of parcels look like. It's about kind of an even split when you combine them all together, homestead and non-homestead, between single-family homes, condominiums, that's looking like about 2/3, and then basically all other. So most of your commercial properties, hotel, motel, restaurants, et cetera, making up the all other category. But obviously, we're very single-family home and condominium dominated here within the city. And then obviously it makes sense on the homesteaded side, you can see a much higher proportion of single-family home to total versus non-homestead, single-family home making up the lowest of the proportion. And then we have, in the third column from the right, the average property tax per parcel here at the current rate. And so what would that look like for an average, the average single-family home? If we look at average single-family home, at the current rate, if you're non-homesteaded, it was $10,846 annually. If we were to reduce our rate to 2.25, it would be $10,536, so a savings of $310 on average for a non-homesteaded single-family home. And if it was a homesteaded single-family home, average was $6,986, so about $7,000. And then if we reduce to be $6,784 for a reduction of $212.
So back to your previous page, you're showing a 0.50 reduction, but for that same 0.25 reduction, you're looking at half of that 212, which is, $56. You're looking at less than $10 a month difference by a 0.25 reduction
Right.
for homestead, which in my humble opinion, that's what this is what this is mainly about, is protecting our homestead and looking what's the best interest of the residents. And that's my focus anyway. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I just want to, present all the data that I have available and dissect it, and hopefully that makes sense to you so you can see the impact of millage rate changes specifically to the city. Obviously, the city is not the only taxing jurisdiction that resides on your tax bill. There are many others, but it is a part of it. So just provide you all the information, and if we were to make any reduction, what would that average look like on an average single-family home, homesteaded versus non-homesteaded? So
Perfect, thank you.
that was the analysis, and if you want anything further or into any detail, tell me now or shoot me an email, and based on all the data I can pull from the property appraiser website, I'm happy to dig further, but hopefully this gave you at least a little bit of perspective on the implications of any changes that you would contemplate in the millage rate, what that impact would be on the average homeowner.
Would the all other on non-homestead, does that include commercial properties?
Primarily commercial properties, yep.
So in the homesteaded, all other would be, what would be an example of all other?
Specifically to homesteaded,
Yes.
I can pull that up. I've got the list, and I can kind of read it off.
Great point.
Single-family condo. Duplexes, triplexes, I think, yeah, multifamily. I don't think we have any group homes.
Multifamily would be like a townhouse? Would that be
No,
considered
like an
multifamily?
apartment building. We have a few kind of
That are-
four.
That are independently owned, that they could homestead? That was my question, because all other.
Not very
If you're
many, I don't think.
homesteading, what would that be that would be considered other?
Yeah, primarily
The,
duplexes.
duplex, apartments, condo conversion, vacant residential, duplex, triplex, fourplex, apartments, 5 to 9 units. I can see how many of those are.
We can certainly obtain a list, I think would be.
Yeah, and I can
I
provide you
just think it's
the
interesting that,
Yeah.
condo conversion.
What else would be
I mean,
homesteaded?
there's not very much assessed value for other under homestead. It just made me curious.
I can think of like 2 duplexes where the owner does live on one side and then,
So then it's probably
Rents
one
the
of the
other.
partial homesteady, homesteads half of the property, but not the other. That would seem reasonable to me.
But to the mayor's point, if you rent property, it's not deeded separately as a duplex, how is that homesteaded?
You can still
you
homestead.
can still.
You can.
Yes, you can.
Rental property?
Yes.
Yes.
If it is a reduced homestead because I had a question from a resident on this, so I spent a lot of time trying to understand it. There are a lot of interesting tax loophole opportunities to live in a home and actually have an apartment, and the apartment would not be homesteaded, but the house would be. And on the tax assessor, they give a different percentage of homestead to your house because that one portion is not homesteaded. I have a long explanation I could share with you, but it's kind of hard to explain.
Please do at some point.
Yeah.
That's very,
It is very interesting.
very interesting, because I look at the non-homestead properties as rental income, and they have every opportunity to adjust rates or whatever their income strategy is. So I don't focus on that. I focus on the homestead and what implications does adjusting the millage rate either up or down, how that impacts our homestead residents versus the overall loss to the city by adjusting it down.
I agree. I do agree.
Thank you, Andrew. It's great stuff.
Yes, thank you very much.
No problem. So then the next page, and again, I'll do this analysis again. That's just the general ad valorem analysis. I'll provide that again, but with millage rate showing what your rollback rate is, what your current rate is, and then maybe a couple in between, once we get that information by July 1st from the property appraisers, just so you can see. And then also when you ultimately we take the vote, if we do, and I'll show you what requires a majority vote versus a 2/3 vote versus a unanimous vote in a particular millage rate. So I can lay all that out in the next meeting, and hopefully we can get consensus. Okay, so then the next page is just, I believe this was a specific request from one of you just to see what new home construction costs are and just in the last 12 months. And I think here's the detail that was pulled from permitting records on the square footage of each home built, the year it was built, and the cost, and then your average cost of $1,244,800.
So I make an assumption that that's living space, that's an air-conditioned living space, that's what we're looking at?
I believe that's heated, but maybe Jenny can
Heated?
confirm.
Yeah, it's,
Sorry about that. Yes, that is.
okay.
That's a living square footage,
B-
and the
B-
average is 2,195.
That would
If you
be
average those numbers out.
BAS, base.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions on ad valorem or anything you all want to discuss on the matter, or thoughts on millage rate or the revenues or anything, or shall we proceed on?
Are you good?
I'm good.
So then this gets into just the meat of the budget. And so what we budgeted for was maintaining a millage rate of 2.75. So using that property tax revenue amount of that $5,782,143 as our proposed ad valorem revenues that are in the general fund. And so that's what we used to build the budget. And so, of course, if that needs to change, then we'll need to know that to make that adjustment. But based on that assumption and then other assumptions we made on revenues and then getting feedback from the departments on certain revenues as well as all the operating expenses, we put together a complete budget for you. So first thing shows just your summary of revenues by fund. You can see the general fund by far has the most revenues at 12.8 million. 5.7 of that is ad valorem revenue, ad valorem taxes, as I mentioned. And there's another graph that gives more specifics to revenues in the general fund by type: taxes, intergovernmental revenue, charges for services, et cetera. So we'll look at that in a moment. But this at least breaks out and shows you of our total revenues and other inflows of 28.8 million. This is what they are broken out by fund. And then the next page will show you the expenditure side. So what are the fund's total expenditures, both personnel, operating, and capital by fund, and we break that out here in alphabetical order by fund, so you can see what those totals are to get total expenses and other outflows of $43,971,000. And so you can see we need to present a balanced budget. So in a balanced budget, my total revenues and other inflows need to equal my total expenses and other outflows. And so on the previous one, on summary of revenues, I was at 28.8 million, and on the expenditures, I'm at 43.9. So there's obviously a discrepancy there, but that's where you bring in that what's called fund balance net position used and fund balance net position available. So some funds budgeted to net, you could say profit, but net increase, fund balance increase. So revenues and other inflows exceed expenditures and other outflows, which lends to fund balance and net position available for future years. In other funds, we have a net deficit, so we would be pulling existing fund balance and reserves that we do have in those funds and making them available to ultimately bring to a zero deficit, where revenues and other inflows plus fund balance used equals expenses and other outflows and fund balance available. So that total, so your total budget then is $44,861,251. And then the next page is the budget summary by character, and that's where you can see that breakout by fund. And I know it's maybe a little hard to see, and I apologize for the smaller font, but if we kind of take this fund by fund, you can see what all the inflows are by type: taxes, permits, fees, special assessments, intergovernmental revenue, charges for services, judgments, fines, forfeits, miscellaneous revenues, and other sources. And then if we also need to use existing fund balance to then equal our total uses: personnel, services, operating, capital outlay, debt service, grants and aids, and other uses. And then that gets us down to where our total sources equal our total uses. So we do have some funds, a couple funds like the impact fee fund, where total revenues and other inflows do exceed proposed expenditures. That's strategically because we were trying to build up reserves in the impact fee fund. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Can I slow you down here for a minute?
Sure.
I want to back up a page or two. The parking fund expenditures at 6 million versus the parking fund revenue at 3.7. A, what accounts for that? You know, I want to give kudos to both the parking and the marina. They're definitely a great source of revenue from our tourism. That's a shout out to the directors on that. But I don't understand what that 6 million, there's something in there that's capital or something that's throwing that parking fund out of whack.
Yep, I'll address that kind of fund by fund as we go through and see, okay, which funds are profitable and which ones are showing a deficit. But just to answer your question directly, we have a $5 million kind of placeholder for that parking garage.
Okay.
So it's obviously very preliminary. We don't have
And
specifics on
I
expenditures. but-
apologize for asking the same questions time after time.
All good, all good. But we wanted to put something in there to show that we do have intent to spend
Again, it's
capital.
budget, it's not actual.
Right, and so once those plans formalize, we'll put something more formal together as far as what we'll be expending. But we did just kind of wanted to insert a $5 million placeholder, kind of ballpark of what we might anticipate to expend in 2025. And we do, and then we'd also have to make other considerations. Once everything kind of gets sorted out, might we need to borrow in order to fund the entire project? So it's a little too preliminary to come to you with that information, but once we have better information, we'll make those decisions. But ultimately, we just wanted to show there is a major capital purchase, capital activity plan in the parking fund. So had you not had that $5 million, then you would be showing a pretty nice profit in the
Yeah,
parking
no,
fund.
I get that. I've had an opportunity to go through the process several times now, and I've never been able to get my head around what is the, minus capital cost, what does it cost to run this city versus what the revenue is coming in? Now, again, if I was running my home, I know I have an operating cost of X. I can throw my repeatable expenditures in, and anything above that, I have an opportunity to kind of save for, future, new car, improvements to the home, whatever, something to actually save on. I never get that feel from the way that it's all presented, and maybe it's broken down so many different ways, it's hard to get the numbers satisfactory in my mind. Do we have a $20 million budget to run this city minus capital expenditures, but we need another $10 million because there's always improvements to the roads and to the sanitation and to the things we want to do, like building parking garages that are going to have return on investment. I never get that feel, and maybe, like I said, maybe I just need a little assistance with that or some direction. But if I'm not getting it, and I've said it through it so many times, not so many times, several times, I would think, unless you're an accountant, so many of our residents don't have a real feel for it either. All they can see is, wow, we have a $45 million budget. What's that mean? It has to be a balanced budget. What's that mean? We're talking about borrowing money. The assumption would be so that we can cover those improvements, those parking garage, that improvements to our water mains and our roads, and But if COVID hit, for God's sake, it doesn't, and we had to fund the city just to keep the employees funded and the air conditioning running, how do I get a feel for that number?
I love the feedback, appreciate that. And the intention is just to make it confusing so you won't ask questions, but clearly you're breaking that mold. But let me, in fact, I'll put that as a note to present this as an additional schedule in the next workshop, is let's pull out the capital and understand, well, how is the city just doing operationally? You can kind of get to it from here, but I'll put a better depiction of that in the next workshop and make that an actual table. But what you could do, if you look at this budget summary by character, that's scheduled, for each fund, and that in the total, in the uses section, you've got capital outlay. That's 60 capital outlay. So those are all your capital costs, and they're quite significant. So if you pulled that out And then I also would then pull out anything in sources under 33 intergovernmental revenue, because we might have some capital projects that may be grant funded. I would pull that out as well and say, okay, well then what's left, that's basically the cost of operations and the revenues to support them. And we actually we'd be looking very good operationally. I mean, just take parking fund, for example. We've got $3,728,750 of revenue. And then if we just minused out that 5.15 million of capital outlay, we'd have about $1 million and change of expenses. So roughly 2.7 million of increase of excess of revenues over expenditures in the parking fund, right? Just looking at general fund, so here we're showing 3.133 million of fund balance net carryover used. That's actually not bad, because we don't have any parking revenues, any transfers from the parking fund going to general fund that's budgeted, because we have it all budgeted to stay in the parking fund to help beef up reserves, to help pay for that major future capital project.
And again, that's to try to, so we understand it better.
Right.
And that's the whole point that was made last year or the year before, to actually create the parking
The parking fund, yeah.
fund. Yeah,
A
parking fund.
dedicated fund, so you can see where those,
And that's,
that source of revenues, and then the cost of operating the parking, yep. So what I'll do is I can strip that out and show you just purely operational where the city lands, and I have no concerns there. So, oh my God, are we going to make payroll? Absolutely. Can we fund $50 million of capital projects over the next few years? Well, we might have to talk about that, right? That's a bigger number, and that's of what the concern is the capital needs, and, stormwater drainage improvement projects. That's where most of the big expenditures are, as you can see in the stormwater fund. That capital outlay number just for next year is almost $7 million, right? And so that's why we did issue debt. We're still working on extinguishing those remaining debt proceeds, and then we've got the next slate of projects, and then we would have to look at, do we need to potentially issue debt for future projects as we get closer to that date. So those are things we need to monitor in the long term as we look at our long-term capital improvement plan, and that's why we present 5 to 6 years of estimated future capital. But operationally, the city is looking good. If you just pull out capital, pull out grant-related revenues from capital projects, you'll see that most funds operated at an excess of revenues over expenditures.
okay,
But I'll
we
present
have
that.
a lot on our plate tonight, so I won't try to hold you up too much.
Just to add to that, Commissioner, that spreadsheet that's up on the big screens, I just highlighted it in blue. That's the expenses for personal or personnel services, so salaries plus benefits that are total projected for next fiscal year at just over 8.6 million. And then right after the second line, other expenditures, expenses at 10.2 million. Operating expenditures, expenses at 10.2 million. To kind of answer your question, that's the majority of the cost to operate the city, with the just over 80 full-time equivalent positions, everything that is done every day. So
it's really as easy as taking out the capital outlay line of $20 million.
correct.
So our operating budget is basically 23 million,
Yeah, that includes
24 million.
yeah, debt and other uses.
Yeah, which you can't, debt, you can't,
Yeah, we
you
have to
can't
pay the
decide, because we're not getting tourism, that we can't pay our
Correct.
debt.
Yeah.
We have to
No,
pay
we
our
have to
debt
pay it, right.
regardless.
Yeah, so just
So-
take out the capital to give you an idea.
So roughly, we have a $20 million budget plus any capital expenditures.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes,
That sums it up.
right there,
Perfect.
yep.
Thank you.
Exactly. And so there's two funds where we do show that excess. That's the impact fee fund, as I was mentioning, is we're trying to accumulate impact fee revenues to then plan for expenditures. But we did and that might even, I believe that's an adjustment from the previous workshop on capital that we did budget for a $45,000 project, I think that's recreation related, to pull that out of the, to fund that out of the impact fee fund. So that's the $45,000 expense, and we're budgeting $185,850 in revenue. And then the marina fund is also earning profit. $748,000 is what we have budgeted to drop to the bottom line in the marina fund. And so then we go just onto the next pages, we then dig more into the general fund. And then I mentioned before, here's where we break out revenues so you can see what those inflows are by character. So charges for services, taxes, permits, fees, special assessments. So just information that gets to the 12.8 million total for the general fund. That tax is $7 million, much of that is ad valorem. Then we have other things like half-cent sales tax, maybe municipal revenue sharing, communication services tax, so on and so forth. Then the next page, you have your general fund expenditure summary. So this is just by character, personnel, operating, capital outlay. It gives you this, and as well as a pie chart. No debt service out of the general fund. We've got debt service out of the stormwater fund and debt service out of the debt service fund. But you can see in that other uses number of a little over 2 million, that's a lot of that transfer activity to those funds to make those debt service payments. Then we break it out, our expenditures by department, to get to that 15,979,351 number. And so this just shows what all the total departmental expenses are within the general fund.
Can I stop you there for a second?
Yep, sure.
We've made significant increases in the fire EMS, and I support that 100%. My question, I know that these resources are divided with other cities up and down the beaches here. So we're seeing the expenditure on there. Where do we see the cost sharing on that? Is that above? I mean, and how is that structured? Do you know?
You're saying our contracts that we'll have with other jurisdictions that
Right.
pay for
we just,
fire services?
We just voted to bring our salaries closer to what the county is, what neighboring areas are, to bring our fire station up to par. Now, we made that decision on our own from basically, I guess, paying for that. I don't know which fund it would be, I guess the general fund. But how does that impact our revenue from neighboring jurisdictions that share in our improvements? Does that get adjusted at some point?
So we do have two accounts within the fire department on the revenue side. One's Reddington Beach Fire Contract and one's Pinellas County EMS. And so we do show that history as well as the 24 budget and the 25 budget, and that is in the fire EMS section.
Okay, I just bring it up, I think it's something that we should have a dialogue on, just so we understand. Maybe it's just me that I don't understand how that is adjusted. Is it like a annual thing that's brought up with our other jurisdictions?
Yeah,
Maybe the chief
Reddington
can-
contract. Yeah, the
and
Reddington
I don't want to take
contract.
the time today to really address it, but I just want to understand, is that an annual thing that we do?
It's adjusted every year by the Tampa Bay Economic, the organization is.
So is that based on people being served? I know like with
No.
the library, it changes based on residents, with the interlocal agreement as it's.
No, they go off of a percentage throughout the Tampa Bay region. I'm not sure how they calculate that. It's usually between 6 and 9%. It's not any higher than that usually.
But
But
when we,
that's the adjustment for the Reddington contracts every
but when
year.
we vote in an increase, it's, some of that is shared proportionately with the neighboring areas that
City
you
of Seminole
serve.
splits the contract with us, and we split it 50/50. This past year, I believe it was 270,000 that we got, and Seminole got the same amount.
Okay, I just don't want it to some residents, I would imagine, push back on any expenditures, not just fire and EMS, but, well, I'd like to be able to show how our revenues have increased.
Well, that's, if you go to page 23 in the packet, under the fire EMS section of our budget, there are two line items about midway down, Reddington Beach Fire Contract, and then Pinellas County EMS, and you can see the increases from fiscal '23 through the current year's budget projected, and then what we're budgeting for next year. So that shows some of the increases, I think, to answer your question, that we are forecasted to receive. But again, and then we do cover the increases that part of the 3-year collective bargaining agreement through other general fund revenue growth as well. But quite a bit is captured here. To your question again, the Pinellas County EMS
Yeah,
is increasing over 100,000, for example.
Perfect, okay.
And the Reddington Beach contract by, 11 or 12,000.
And our accounting software codes all, not only expenses by department, but we also intentionally code revenues by department. A lot of other accounting systems is just expense only, but we do revenue and expense, so you can trace actual revenues that a specific department generates to that department instead of just making it general. So we have, many of our revenues are in the non-departmental department ID, if it's more general to the city, like your ad valorem taxes. But those revenues, like recreation has a bunch, right, where they're generating revenues specific to operations within recreation, and we code that to that recreation department, and you'll see that in those budget pages where we'll show both the revenues they generate and their expenses.
Great, thank you.
So we were at the general fund expenditure summary, so that just shows you all their outflows by department. And then after that, we go right into these details of each department. We give a little overview of the department and then some preliminary figures of, like I mentioned, those revenue account codes and expenditure account codes that hit those respective departments. By the time we'll finalize the budget, we'll also have accomplishments, FY24 accomplishments, and FY25 goals and objectives that we'll add to each of the departments so you can see what those departmental initiatives are for the upcoming budget year. So we can go in as little or as much detail at the line item level by department that you want. Maybe I can just kind of briefly stop at each one, say, questions, feel free to ask. So just, kind of starting on Board of Commissioners. Any questions? Like, for example, you might be like, geez, why is our budget doubled almost? You guys are expensive. You can see a lot of that is just the additional line on group insurance, right? So that was now offering group health insurance to the members of the commission. That did not occur previously. And since we don't know who's taking insurance and who's not, we are budgeting for each of you to be taking the insurance.
But you're budgeting for both salary and insurance, which that would be an error because it's one or the other.
If you're taking the insurance, then you're not taking the salary.
Correct.
We can
We can adjust that.
adjust that then, yep. And how would you like that adjusted? keep the salaries and
Well,
zero out the insurance?
the max you should put in the budget would be the difference between what the salary and Social Security and anything that goes along with the
Oh,
salary.
Yeah, and the benefits are higher, so we can budget
So it
for
would
the
be,
benefits. and
it
we
would
can-
be if the benefits exceed what the salary would be and associated funds
Okay,
go along
then we
with
can
that.
take, we can put the
Then you-
delta in the group insurance.
Right, and then the actual would have to come below what the budget was.
Yep, sounds good. Okay, we'll make that change for the next workshop.
Okay.
And so that group insurance number will be lower to take the total minus the commission and Social Security against it. Anything on city clerk? If nothing there, the next is city manager. Just a couple revenue items on the city manager's office, oversees the retail shop at the front of City Hall, so we've got a couple items for the sales of the merchandise. And then the next page is the expenses, personnel and operating, and one on capital improvement.
And it's not a new position, the executive salary and the city manager, if you're wondering where, it's just broken out. The city manager salary versus the rest of the stuff.
Yep. That's why salaries and wages is lower
Decreased.
than previous, because we moved that to executive salary. That's to follow the state of Florida prescribed chart of accounts. Then next, community development. Some revenue items on your BTRs that community development manages, some plan review fees, application fees, and then your expenses, personnel and operating.
I think I had mentioned briefly in the past, looking at several revenues and adjustments that we would be looking to make, and this is one I believe I'd shared with each of you. We are looking for an increase in the local business tax receipt. I think we are restricted by statute for no more than a 5% increase. We have not raised our local business tax for many years, so we're looking to increase for next year. And again, these are nominal. Some businesses pay typically under $100 for the whole year.
Some of them are paying like $9.41 or some crazy weird number like
Yes.
that. Yeah.
What is the 150 in capital improvements under
City manager,
city manager, yeah? What's that budgeted for?
let me pull that up.
Is that for improvements to our sound system?
That's in your capital improvement plan at the end. It's in general fund. That's City Hall veranda and stair replacement.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
remember
replacing
that.
everything out.
Looking to replace the tile along the stair in the second floor veranda of City Hall. Current tile is not all slip resistant and grout is coming up on the stairs. Then we have finance. All operating expenses for finance, nothing capital related, no revenues. Then we have fire EMS. So we do have some revenues from that as we discussed. That I show in the general fund, and there's also some impact fee revenues that are relating to public safety that we code to the fire department. And then your expenses on the next page. A bigger increase in budgeted salaries for '25 compared to '24. Some of that is the deputy fire chief position, as well as the increases through the union negotiations. And then some capital as well, that some of which that's coming out of general fund, and then some that's coming out of our local option sales tax fund or loss fund. That's Fund 103. And all those details are in our capital improvement plan at the end of this packet. Then HR, we used to have salaries coming out of HR. Right now, from a personnel standpoint, HR is managed out of the city manager's office, so we have no human resources expenses on the personnel side, and then just a little bit on the operating expenses, biggest of which software support services, where I think our payroll, HR payroll software is born in HR. And that's the biggest expense out of HR. Then IT, some expenses out of IT, vast majority of which is through our contracted provider. So again, no salaries and wages there, just all mainly contractual services. And Johns Pass Village,
Yeah, what is the revenue side of that? It's a state appropriations?
on the Johns Pass Village, I believe.
That's
and
the
Megan
dredging.
confirmed that's the dredging project, so we have maintenance dredging for $750K and then state appropriations to fund that for the $750K.
Okay.
And we have that as an operating expense, not capital, and that it doesn't really produce an asset owned by the city as a result. It's a, therefore, considered an operating expenditure. Then law enforcement, so that's our contractual service with Pinellas County. You can see what we have budgeted in 2025, and that's from what was recently approved by commission, I believe, for the upcoming fiscal year, so that's contractual. You can see that, plus the history. And then legal services for our beloved city attorney. And then a small amount for other legal expenses, and then some non-retainer expenses as well. And then we've got non-departmental. Most of those are our revenues that aren't specific to any other department, so they kind of fall in that catch-all non-departmental category. And then same thing with expenses. Those expenses that kind of encompass city operations in general that don't really apply specifically to any of their departments. So a lot of our utilities, telephone, overall building maintenance, fireworks, Christmas decorations, etc. And then also shows our transfer activity. So we have showing a transfer out to the debt service fund to make that annual debt service payment on, I believe it's the 2013 debt that's remaining, and then the transfer to the stormwater fund for almost 1.5 million for debt service for stormwater. And then a little bit on parks. Again, no personnel in parks, just mainly services, water services, solid waste disposal. Then we've got Public Works Administration, and there we've got both personnel and some operating. And again, we got wrapping up Gulf Boulevard undergrounding, and again, not a capital expense, but considered operating, since those are not the city's roads. So we've got 625,000 budgeted left for Gulf Boulevard undergrounding. And then 1 million in capital improvements, that's detailed out at the back of our document. Then recreation, you've got our handful of recreation accounts, summer programs, after-school programs, field rentals, leagues, and then at the end, the impact fee revenues that'll be going to recreation, that's going to hit the impact fee fund. And then we have our recreation expenses, all detailed out. It's personnel, operating, and capital. Then you've got the Archibald Park. So now we're out of general fund, and now we're into our other, all other funds of the city. So we've got Archibald Park, revenues and expenses, state appropriation. Then we have parking revenues that's at Archibald Beach parking. So we capture that revenue in the Archibald Fund. All other parking receipt activity is booked in the parking fund. So Archibald is the one exception for those meters that gets booked to the Archibald Fund, Fund 110. And then on the expense side, you've got some personnel that gets allocated to Archibald, some operating expenses, mainly maintenance activities, solid waste disposal, water services, et cetera. And then the capital projects, biggest of which is the beach growings renourishment. Then you've got the building fund. Main revenue, source of revenue is, it's all in one GL account on building permits. A little bit on applications, fees, and interest, but obviously the main is your building permit revenue. And then you've got your salaries and wages and benefits and operating, and then a little bit on capital as well. Biggest one is that $500,000 for, we talked about in the last meeting, for the Public Works facility with a section for building. Almost wrapping up, then you got the debt service fund. That's just simple, that's the transfers in, any interest earned on those transfers in from general fund, and then the debt service principal and interest that we anticipate to pay for next fiscal year for the outstanding debt. And then next, the gas tax fund. So this is just, we get gas tax revenues, and then we pay for maintenance of streets and the electric for the street lights. So that's pretty consistent, recurring, annual, on an annual basis, no surprises there. Then the impact fee fund, it shows all our different impact fee revenues from 23, what we budgeted in 24, what we expect, what we're projecting to finish in collections in 24, and then budgeting in 25. So that is growing over time, and then we're just starting to now allocate some eligible capital improvement projects to be spent with impact fee dollars, starting in FY25. And that's going to be for that $45,000 for recreation. Then your local option sales tax fund, that's that 7 cent, that's your penny for Pinellas, budget at $700,000, and then 2.8 million of budgeted expenditures in local option sales tax on the capital. And so we do have quite a difference there, but we also have a buildup of fund balance in that lost fund that's accumulated over the years from the excess of those revenues and less in capital expenditures. Then the Marina Fund, a variety of revenues from your fuel sales. We also offset that with a contra revenue for fuel purchases, diesel sales, propane sales, purchase sales of your items from their store, as well as the offsetting contra revenue against that on the purchases. And so that lands you at the net revenues of $1,961,200. And then on the next page are all your expenses, personnel, operating, and just a little bit of capital, if any. And a debt service payment to the general fund for an interfund loan, and that payment's budgeted for $140,000. And then the next one, parking fund, so 3.7 million budgeted for revenues, and you can see all those GL accounts broken out by the different regions, areas, Village Boulevard, City South Beach, Johns Pass Village, et cetera, as well as parking fine, estimated collections for parking fines, and then your expenses, so $6,225,000, but you see that we have that big $5 million number in capital improvements as we starting to formulate a plan on paying for the parking garage. Then the sanitation fund, primary source of revenue, and that is your sanitation charges. That's billed through Pinellas County Utilities. And so total revenues there, we get the 1.8 million, and then we also have a recycling service fee, and then interest earnings totaling 1.88 million. And then our expenditures, and I believe we have no capital expenditures planned for FY25, some vehicle replacements that will occur in 26 and beyond, but no capital in 25. Then the stormwater fund, we've got a stormwater grant, as well as some stormwater service charges also that are included on the utility bills, billed through Pinellas County Utilities, some interest earnings, and then the transfer from the general fund, 3.5 million revenue, and then you can see all the expenses heavily dominated on the capital side. And those details of those capital projects are in our capital section. And so that's everything by the department, all the way down to the individual GL account string for every account in the chart of accounts of the city.
I have a question.
Hit me.
You spurred my interest when you, I don't know, page 25, Johns Pass Village. So we spend 1.2 million, you have another million in capital improvements budgeted. 1.2 million annually just running. Johns Pass Village is a gem, but just how much of a gem is it to the city? We have an annual expense of 1.2 just to keep it. Now, of course, you have the ad valorem taxes of all the businesses down there. Of course, you have the parking revenue, which is tremendous. I'd like to be able to get a feel. I don't want to create work, but a feel for what is the value of Johns Pass Village to this community. You get pushback we get from people that don't like tourism because it's too much traffic or any issue that comes with tourism. But what is the value of having that asset versus like Reddington Beach? They don't have an asset like that just brings tourism. Yeah, you have the condos. Kind of the same with the Archibald Park. Maybe that's already more defined because you have the parking revenue right in there, and you have the expenses, and it's a little easier to delineate. But I'm just curious, just as a talking point that Johns Pass Village, because we have it there, that helps support the community by $4 million a year. That offsets costs to the community by whatever that number is. Just curious.
I mean, quantitatively, we've got parking revenue that we can easily quantify. We have Johns Pass Village parking revenue in a specific general ledger account. We could also look at the properties in Johns Pass Village and see what those taxable
Yeah, like I
values
said, I
are.
don't want to,
But that's quantitative, and then you've got qualitative factors.
well, that's absolutely true. But just as a,
I'm the numbers guy, but maybe someone else could chime in on those.
well, there's no discussion that that is the gem of Madeira Beach. We all enjoy it. We can go down and when we have family visit or friends visit, it's a wonderful piece of Madeira Beach history, of who we are. There's no question of that. I don't want to, by asking the question, I don't want to put in anyone's mind that, it's not an asset. Even if it's an expense to the residents, overall you look at it and it's not really generating any additional revenue that's used for capital projects that we have or whatever. Just a curious question that it's never been addressed as far as I know.
Well, just as Andrew stated, and up on the screen, for example, we're budgeting for next year about 2.7 million that we will collect just in parking between Johns Pass Village, Johns Pass Village plus the Village Boulevard parking is 1.95 million.
Okay, so
Just in
that's-
parking.
that's 2
revenue.
million.
Yeah,
Okay.
then there's I'm not sure if the Johns Pass Village includes the surface lot. That's the surface lot. So 1.95 million, we're not counting anything. Obviously, people that pay to park across the bridge at the Johns Pass Park parking lot use the village as
Sure.
well. So, say 50% of that
And the
goes to.
businesses make,
And we have business taxes, we have sales tax collection, we have utility taxes for electric, for water, from the businesses in the village, all
Yeah.
of that.
you could spitball it, is it a $5 million?
Probably closer, somewhere probably in the neighborhood of probably 3 to 4 million.
Okay.
But we don't, property taxes are probably, I'm going to just kind of guesstimate probably a little over $1 million. So that's why I said probably approaching 4 to 5 million a year in revenue that's generated from the
So
activity
it's something
there.
we can enjoy every day, and it actually helps fund our expenses. But I was just trying to get a feel, it's a $4 million.
Yeah, it's 4 to 5 million, and we generate, even special events generate.
Yeah, and how many tourists does it bring for sporting events, recreation, and other?
It's clearly
Yeah.
a huge draw, part of the economic impact that we have, for example, from the seafood festival was into the millions.
That's what I was coming up here to mention. They actually did an impact study this last year. It was projected at 6.5 million
Okay,
for that weekend.
Just for that
so
weekend.
someone has kind of
Correct.
thought this through, and 6.5 million, love it.
Yeah, just from the Visit St. Pete Clearwater, the contractor that they use to generate economic impact from a variety of events countywide.
And then that $1 million for the capital is to mill and resurface Johns Pass Village. So that's not an ongoing,
Right.
I mean, we're talking
It's capital, I
20 years.
expect it.
and then the,
That's why
obviously
I
the
adjusted
dredging.
to 1.2 as an expense.
Yeah.
So it cost us 1.2 to generate 6.5. That's a win. I'd take that in any business class.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and even, Krabby might know best, obviously, but I'm sure some of the fleet uses our fuel to refuel the majority of boats or et cetera. So, and also businesses, obviously, and visitors to the village are the economic impact has to be into the tens of millions, because you have a percentage that are staying in properties in Madeira. So they're generating that activity plus shopping, not just in the village and the boardwalk, but in other areas. And I see half a dozen of the water businesses in the village that obtain their unleaded fuel from pretty much one place in the city. because we have one gas station. So you can kind of keep adding to the economic impact, and it is likely into the tens of millions.
Someone's done a study. I mean, I knew it was positive, I just didn't know how positive. And I thought it was a question worth asking.
Yep, good.
Hard to argue that it's not an asset of the city, in conclusion.
Thank you, Andrew, as always.
No problem. Just the last couple pages here, and that'll wrap up the workshop items on my agenda. So we've got the funded positions, personnel services. This just gives you some historical perspective dating back to 2018 all the way now through 2025 by department. So you can see any changes there in number of personnel, as well as the personnel services, costs, wages, and benefits from historically to now. So just giving that to you on a summarized basis, and then we also provide the funded positions by department, just so you can see the position titles of all employees within the city. And some we have, like for example, in building services, the community development director, that's .1 position, right? So that's Jenny's position that gets allocated between building services and community development. So we do have some folks, mostly at the director level, that we do allocate their time and ultimately their personnel costs among different departments. And then others that may just be part-time, that might be considered less than one FTE. So that's just information for you if you had any questions on positions at all.
I stated earlier, we are, as you can see on the screen, our full-time equivalents going from 83.56 to 83.79, so very negligible increase citywide. And as that slide shows at the end, the growth from 18 to 25, 26%, or just a little over, 3% on average from year to year.
And then the last page is really just a repeat of what we've already gone over, so I won't necessarily belabor that unless you had particular questions. Historical capital outlay, and then our capital improvement plan, of which there may have only been a couple very minor changes. Probably the biggest one is including the field maintenance vehicle for $45,000. We'll start to now want to spend impact fee dollars, since we now have them mostly in the general, in the recreation side. So we've got our first budgeted capital project for impact fee fund for $45,000. And so our total for capital, we present that on that one-page summary by fund, is $20,101,500. And then we show in the following pages a breakout by each project title and description, not only for FY25, but for the 4 years subsequent to that. So give you a 5-year plan of project expenditures by fund. For Archibald, building, general fund, the local option sales tax fund, the marina fund, the parking fund, sanitation fund, stormwater fund. And again, we've already been through these, so don't need to go through one by one unless you have anything that you want to ask about.
I'm fine.
If not, that'll just take us right to the Q&A and the preparation for the July workshop. So my plan for the July workshop is present something very similar. And again, we might have some things that come to light, and different departments might bring some information to me and say, hey, we need to update this because I got this information. I'll make those changes. And we can also keep note of that so I can inform you all of any changes from the last version that you saw on to the next. And then we'll try to finalize the plan for the ad valorem, the millage rate, so I can submit that to the property appraiser in that DR 422 form, and that'll go on the trim notices to all the property owners within Madeira Beach, what their proposed millage rate will be and their estimated tax liability. And that'll take, that's the July plan, and then the August plan will be the absolute complete budget document, including the city manager's message, my summary, so all the narrative versions as well, and then all these schedules and tables. And then, if that's good for you all, that would be the last workshop, assuming you're then good with the final document for adoption. We'll have our 2 public meetings in September, and call it a day. Sounds good.
And just to add one other, as I mentioned earlier about increases in, that I'd mentioned earlier, the business tax receipt, as I mentioned, a 5% increase. We have discussed up here at a prior workshop for parking, going from $3 an hour to $4 an hour for parking, visitor parking at each one of our spaces, and that's reflected in the budget.
We did, yep.
To show that. And I believe just a few other increases, and Krabby, I think some in the marina for some, but we will bring each one of these back to you individually to discuss and to approve, to discuss at the July workshop.
Yep.
And then they do have to be adopted via an ordinance, so there will be 2 readings and public hearings for the fee increases, including the business tax receipt, at those meetings, and have the opportunity for more discussion and more input for all the fee increases. But again, mainly business tax receipt, parking, and again, business tax receipt is in the general fund, parking is in the parking fund, any increases in the marina are in the marina fund. And if we have any other specific increases across departments, we'll obviously identify those, but they will all be part of when we bring back the manual for our fee and expense manual.
Great.
Do we have any public comment? Commissioners?
Fine.
Great job, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nicely done. With that, we're adjourned. It is 5:22.